Hey, what's up everyone, Danny here. This is a system I put together recently that is a beast for gaming, and it comes in at around $1,300. This was put together using mostly new components, and I say mostly new because there's one part in here that is used, which I'll explain later on when we get to the parts list. But regardless, all the parts I got reflect pretty standard, readily available pricing in the US, so if you wanted to build something similar at this price point and performance level, it will be relatively easy to do so. You can actually come in at the same performance and a decent amount cheaper than $1,300. I put some fancier stuff in here that you don't really need, and I'll tell you how to do that when we get to the price summary. But this can handle any game thrown at it, and based on the hardware inside, it's targeted for 1440p high refresh rate gaming. The highlight of the build though, to me, is definitely the case and the CPU cooler, which feature digital displays letting you know the temperature and utilization of the hardware inside. More on that in a little bit though. Let's go over the complete parts list. Starting off with the processor, we have AMD's Ryzen 5 7600. Fun fact, this is the first AM5 processor that is being showcased on the channel, and the reason for that is because AM4 has remained such a relevant platform and still provides a great value proposition, so I don't feel like going AM5 is necessarily a requirement, but if you can afford it, it does buy you into this newer platform that gives you a strong upgrade path for years to come. The 7600 is the most affordable AM5 option in the US right now. AMD is kind of dragging their feet with more budget-oriented chips. There's still no Ryzen 3 desktop processors for this platform yet, and they did launch the sub $200 Ryzen 7400F a few months ago, but that was a quiet launch in China and is still nowhere to be seen from retailers in the States. So yeah, the 7600 is the most affordable AM5 option we have right now. The 7600 has its included cooler, the Race Stealth, but in this build I'm using something a little different that I think is pretty cool and brings some excitement to the CPU air cooling space, and that is with Deepcool's AK Digital lineup, and this one is the AK500 Digital. This is a refresh of their existing AK500 Zero Dark, which was an aesthetically sleek looking 5 heat pipe medium sized tower cooler, and with this refresh it's equipped with a new top plate that has LED strips for all your RGB needs if you fancy that, but more notable is the digital display that monitors your CPU's temperature and usage. Temperatures are reported to the nearest whole degree, and utilization is reported in 10% increments by way of these teal bars. There's plenty of software out there for you to monitor this kind of stuff, like Hardware Info, Hardware Monitor, NZXT Cam, Corsair IQ. You can use Rain Meter to have it always showing on your desktop, but I don't know, there's something about always being able to visually see what your temperature and load are at any given moment, even if you're like full screen in the game or running something heavy in the background, just to be able to glance over and instantly know what your stats are rather than having to open up those aforementioned programs or running overlays like Riva Tuner. I personally really like this, and I hope more coolers like this come out in the future, because as of right now, the only ones I know of are the Deepcool ones and this Alzai one. Now this display is definitely considered a luxury, and because of that, it does come at a higher cost. Compared to the original AK500, the digital version costs $15 more at $70, which is not cheap, and that's probably because there's not much competition in the space yet. Come on, Thermalright, ID Cooling, Be-True, whoever, come out and make like a $40 or $30 version of this if you can, please. Moving on to the motherboard, I grabbed this Aorus B650 Elite AX on Amazon, and this is the one used part in this build like I mentioned earlier. To be honest, I wasn't looking for this motherboard specifically, I was just seeing what used deals Amazon had to offer. All I knew is that I needed an AM5 motherboard, preferably not an A620 chipset, and this was the top choice from what I found at nearly $100 discount compared to it being new. I bought a lot of used motherboards on Amazon because it's kind of a gold mine, especially if you can find it sold and shipped by Amazon Warehouse, because they have a hassle-free return policy should anything go wrong, like if there's a defect with it or if it's missing anything drastic that you need in the box, like the IO shield, Wi-Fi antennas, or anything like that. For this board specifically, the IO shield is built in, so I didn't have to worry about that. The Wi-Fi antenna was included and it was in great condition. The only thing missing was the M.2 heatsink on the topmost M.2 slot. The screw was there, but just the heatsink wasn't there. And for me, this was not a deal breaker because the board was so discounted. I can always get a different heatsink later if needed, but for now I can use the 2 slots under the larger heatsink without worrying. Driving the gaming performance of this build will be the RX 7800 XT. This is the Sapphire Nitro Plus card, which shout out to John the Net Guy for helping me get this for this build. We've had a pretty disappointing run of graphics card releases this year, but the 7800 XT was one of the better ones. And also, since I already have a 7700 XT on hand, I decided to throw this in the system as well for you to see later on in benchmarks. And that's mostly to show what most people already know by now, that between these two cards, the 7800 XT and the 7700 XT, this one is the clear better buy. It costs about 10 to 11% more than this, but the performance increase is quite a bit more than 10 to 11%, and you'll see that later on in the benchmarks. For memory, I went with this 32GB kit of Team Group T4 Vulcan DDR5 rated at 6000 CL30. Looking at benchmarks between different RAM speeds and latencies, I found that this was the sweet spot for price and performance. No RGB or anything fancy here, just a plain black kit since I was going for pretty subtle aesthetics for the build overall. Storage wise, this build's got a 1TB Intel 670p NVMe SSD. Cue the angry comments about me using a Gen 3 drive with a motherboard that is PCIe Gen 5 capable. Look, Gen 5 drives are still too expensive for their limited use cases, especially for gamers. Gen 4, and I'd even argue Gen 3 is still very relevant. This is the last Intel 670p I have left on my shelf since I always kept some on hand for builds or upgrades for friends and family, but they're starting to be phased out because Intel is no longer in the SSD business. RIP Intel SSD division. The power supply I went with is the 600W Thermaltake Tough Power GX2. This unit finds itself at the C tier on the Cultist tier list, which is a tier that I've never had issues with using, but digging deeper into the dedicated reviews and the Cultist Discord server, this unit is essentially a B tier unit, only missing the designation for having over temperature protection claimed on its spec sheet, but legendary power supply reviewer Johnny Guru says it does have OTP by way of the fan controller, so take that as you will. This power supply does have some ugly ketchup and mustard cable going on, so I did grab some plain black cable extensions to hide this. Alright, last but not least, the case, the Deepcool CH560 Digital. This is a mid-tower case that has 4 adjustable RGB fans included, 3 of which are 140mm at the front intake and one 120mm at the rear exhaust. This case has a lot of things going for it, such as great airflow by way of all the breathable panels on the front, side, top, and rear. It has a very strong magnetic tempered glass side panel that eliminates the need for any screws to get in and out of the main chamber. It has a built-in graphics card sag bracket that's virtually hidden once the card is installed, and of course the most unique thing about it is the temperature display similar to the AK500 cooler, but on this CH560 Digital we have both the CPU and the GPU. These displays work by plugging into your motherboard USB header and is controlled by very minimal software from Deepcool, where you can change basic things like what you want displayed on the numbers as well as the units that the temperature is in. Alright, let's take a look at the build summary and price breakdown. In total, this build comes in just a bit over $1,300, but as I mentioned at the start of the video, there is some fat that you can trim to bring this down a bit. The first thing is, you definitely do not need both the AK500 digital cooler and the CH560 digital case. This is doubling up, which I did in this video to showcase both the parts, but in practice, I'd recommend choosing one or the other to save some money. If you're okay with just the CPU temps, just grab the cooler, but if you want both of them, then forgo the cooler and grab the case. Also, while the Nitro Plus 7800 XT is a great card, it does carry a bit of a premium, and you can easily grab a cheaper 7800 XT closer to MSRP. Doing both these things will bring you in much closer to the $1,200 mark, and you're gonna get pretty much the same performance I'm gonna show upcoming in the benchmarks. Here's the quick build montage followed by some B-roll and glamour shots. Now let's take a look at the performance. I didn't do anything fancy with regards to overclocking, just enabled PBO for the CPU and the motherboard, as well as had the Expo memory profile set to the rated 6000 CL30 speeds. For the graphics cards, I just left both of them at their out-of-the-box settings. I didn't move any sliders to increase their core or memory clock speeds at all. All the titles I tested were at 1440p max settings, as that's what the system is targeted for, and you'll see the results for the 7700 XT over here on your right, and then the 7800 XT results over here on your left. So yeah, sit back, relax, and enjoy the benchmarks.
that's all right. That's all right.
Alright, there you have it. Very solid results at 1440p. The 7800 XT is the clear winner when it comes to value between these two cards, averaging about 20% better performance in the titles that I tested anyways, while only coming in at about 10% higher cost, you know, $500 versus $450. And in the long run, that performance spread will likely widen a bit for future games that are more reliant on video memory. Overall though, I think we're at a pretty good spot right now when it comes to DIY PC building. I mean, we're talking about a system under $1,500 that lets you play everything, even the latest hardest to run titles, at max settings, 1440p with ease. It's a pretty good time to build a PC if you've ever been waiting for whatever reason. Prices on most components have been pretty good, and this build was, you know, with almost all new parts. You can push the price of performance envelope even more if you start subbing in more used parts or forego some of the fancier things like the cooler or the case. With PC building though, there's always a ton of different ways to build something for any given price. I usually try to optimize on price to performance on this channel, but sometimes in cases like this, I decide to be more flexible and I mix in some different or interesting components to show you all and give me a chance to work with them for the first time. With that said though, let me know for around $1,200 to $1,300 price range, what would you put into a PC build, at least with regards to the CPU and GPU, since those are the primary drivers of the performance. I'm really curious to hear. While I went with AM5 in this build, I know that there are plenty of options with like AM4 I could have gone with, or even on Intel side of things, either with the 12th or 13th gen processors. Let's not talk about 14th gen stuff. And if we considered used graphics cards, oh man, there are quite a few options from last generation that would have fit nicely into this build. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for this video though. Hope you all enjoyed and found this entertaining or useful in one way or another. I want to thank you all as always for watching and for continuing to support the channel. Huge thanks to the channel members and the super gifters for their above and beyond support. Be safe out there, and I'll see you all down in the comments as well as next stream and or video. Bye.